Sometimes the biggest stories, they don't exactly announce themselves. They might start small, like a ripple, right? And then suddenly they reveal this whole hidden landscape. That really feels like what we're diving into today with our source material.
Yeah, definitely.
It's an article about this one specific incident in China that just cracked open a much bigger national conversation.
It's a really fascinating case study, actually. Shows how fast a seemingly personal scandal can just escalate.
Right.
And expose these deeper currents in society. The article focuses on a situation at a top Beijing hospital, the China-Japan Friendship Hospital.
Okay.
And it involves two figures, a senior surgeon, Zhao Fei, and a junior doctor, Dong Xin.
Right, okay. And the whole thing kind of blew up in mid-April, when the surgeon's estranged wife posted something online.
Exactly. She posted this letter, and the allegations were pretty serious.
What were the main claims, according to the source?
Well, there were claims about affairs with colleagues, but the real bombshell, I think, was the accusation that he left an anesthetized patient.
Left them, like unattended.
Unattended by a doctor, yeah, during surgery.
Wow, okay. Leaving a patient like that mid-surgery, that's huge. Ethically, medically.
Absolutely. Major red flag.
So how did the hospital handle that? What was their initial response?
Well, the source says the hospital moved relatively fast. They investigated. And by April 27th, so, pretty quick turnaround, they announced their findings, said the allegations were basically true.
Basically true.
Okay.
So, consequences.
Oh, yeah. Big ones for Zhao Fei. He was sacked and expelled from the Communist Party.
Sacked and expelled. Within weeks. That's quite decisive. But didn't the source say he disputed part of it, the patient part?
He did, yeah. He spoke to state media later and sort of pushed back. He claimed he hadn't actually violated medical ethics.
Oh. How did he explain it then?
He said he only left the operating room for about 10 to 20 minutes, apparently to sort out some kind of dispute with a nurse. And he insisted the patient wasn't truly unattended, that anesthetists were still there.
Ah, okay. So even right at the start, you have these slightly different narratives popping up in the source material about what exactly went down in that OR.
Precisely. You've got the scandal, the serious accusations, the quick official action, but then also these contested details simmering underneath.
Okay, so this deep dive, our mission here, is really to unpack how this specific incident, which starts looking like a personal scandal, just transforms.
Yeah.
The source makes it clear it blew up into this huge national debate in China, all about privilege, ethics, fairness. So we're going to trace that, pull out how the article shows that shift happening.
And it's such a powerful example of how one event can just become a lightning rod,
Totally.
It taps into these underlying frustrations, these tensions that are already there just below the surface. This article really gives us a window into that whole dynamic.
Okay, so let's get into what happened next. Because after that initial news, the focus seemed to shift a bit, didn't it? People started looking more closely at the junior doctor, Dong Xin.
Yeah, this is where the privilege angle really comes into play. The source highlights that the public, online sleuths basically, discovered how she got into medicine.
How so?
Through this experimental program called the 4+4, it was at Peking Union Medical College, which is, one of the absolute top medical schools in China.
4+4. That sounds unusual. What is that?
It is quite different. It's a program for students who already have an undergraduate degree, but in something other than pre-med.
Okay.
And it offers them this accelerated path, just 4 years to become a doctor. It bypasses the usual much longer track, which can take like a decade or more.
Wow, 4 years versus 10 plus. That's a big difference.
Huge. And the detail that really caught everyone's attention, the thing people dug up, was her first degree.
What was it in?
Economics. From Barnard College in New York. Okay. Economics. From the U.S. And then a fast track into one of China's elite medical schools. I can see how that might raise some questions.
Exactly. It immediately sparked suspicion online. People started asking, wait a minute, how does an economics degree from an American college qualify someone for this super fast medical track?
Right.
Was this 4+4 program basically a kind of backdoor, a way for people with connections or maybe privileged backgrounds, international experience, to just skip the standard, tough, merit-based route?
Especially into a profession where, as the article says, lives are literally on the line.
Precisely. So that personal scandal very quickly started tapping into these much deeper public anxieties about fairness, about who gets ahead, about whether the system is rigged.
So it wasn't just about this one hospital incident anymore.
Not at all. By late April, early May, the source says this was just one of the absolute hottest topics online in China. There was even a specific hashtag on Weibo basically asking, okay, Xiaofei was dealt with. When are Dongxing's issues going to be investigated?
And did that get much traction? Over 200 million views.
Whoa, 200 million. That's a massive public engagement. It wasn't just random people commenting either, was it? The source mentioned media got involved.
Yeah, it did. An online news service, Jimu News, apparently published commentary saying something like, look, this farce has basically evolved into an issue of social fairness.
Calling it an issue of social fairness directly.
Directly. And they also mentioned these online reports that some of Mrs. Dong's academic papers had suddenly vanished from a big academic database.
Oh, really? Disappeared.
That's what was reported online, yeah. Which you can imagine just poured fuel on the fire, made people even more suspicious about a potential cover-up or special treatment.
Okay, so you've got this perfect storm brewing, perceived unfair access via this special program, massive online discussion, media calling it a fairness issue, rumors of records disappearing. That must have been incredibly difficult for the authorities to handle.
Yeah, the source describes it as a difficult operation for them because, while the authorities in China obviously have ways to manage information flow, trying to just completely shut down something that's exploded like this online, especially when it touches on fairness, that can sometimes backfire, make things worse.
So suppression wasn't really the main tactic here. What did they do?
It seems their approach shifted more towards trying to, let's say, manage or steer the narrative. State media did report on the main facts, the hospital's actions, the public concern. They acknowledged it.
Okay.
But the article notes that the censors were still struggling to really contain the wider conversation because it wasn't just sticking to the Xiaofei and Dongxing case anymore.
It was bleeding into other areas.
Exactly. People were using this case as a jumping-off point to talk about much broader and, frankly, much sharper criticisms.
What kind of wider issues came up?
Well, the source mentions significant criticism about perceived corruption within hospitals, within academia. Also talk about this perceived, callous self-centeredness among the elite, the well-connected, and just this fundamental widespread suspicion that the best jobs, the best opportunities, they disproportionately go to people from privileged backgrounds, the highborn, as some might put it.
Wow. So a single-sex scandal really did become this sort of proxy battleground for all these long simmering frustrations about inequality and access in China.
Pretty much, yeah.
So faced with all that, what final steps did the authorities take? The source mentions some concrete actions, right, to try and put a lid on it.
It does. On May 15th, there was a pretty major announcement from the health ministry.
Okay, what was it?
Both Xiaofei and Dongxing had their licenses revoked, their physician licenses.
Stripped of their licenses to practice medicine. That's a career-ending move. Very serious.
Extremely serious. And the source suggests that the thinking was likely that this action, taking the two main figures out of the picture professionally, combined with a promise from the ministry to do a comprehensive assessment of those fast-track schemes like the 4+4 program.
Addressing the pathway issue, too.
Addressing the pathway issue, yeah. The hope was probably that this combination would, calm things down, settle the issue.
And did it, online at least.
Well, the article does point out something interesting. After these announcements, the story was apparently pulled from Weibo's list of hot searches.
The classic de-amplification move.
Kind of turning down the volume online, yeah. A common tactic, once official action has been seen to be taken, it shows that effort to regain control after that period of intense public focus.
Now, despite all the seriousness here, privilege, ethics, corruption fears, the source includes this one detail about the public reaction it's kind of telling, isn't it? Adds another layer.
That detail really jumped out at me, too, because it shows that even with all the bitterness and frustration this whole thing stirred up, people didn't completely lose their sense of humor. Or maybe their gallows humor.
You're talking about that joke that was apparently doing the rounds.
Exactly. The source describes this joke. It goes something like, a patient says, yeah, I had to use connections, Gronxy, to get into this hospital.
Okay.
And then the surgeon says, me too. Use contacts to get my job. The assistant surgeon pipes up, same here.
Right. Where's this going?
Then the punchline comes from the virus. The virus says, am I the only one around here who got in purely on his own merits?
Oh, my God. Wow. That's dark. But incredibly sharp, isn't it?
It's brutal, but it perfectly captures that deep public cynicism, that feeling that everyone is using connections to get ahead, even in life-or-death places like hospitals.
Yeah, it just nails that feeling of unfairness. And it shows how people use humor, even dark humor, to process and comment on these really serious societal problems.
It really does. It shows how deeply that sentiment runs and how culture finds ways, even through a joke, to articulate these widespread feelings.
So just to recap this whole deep dive then, we've seen how this initial scandal, starting with affairs and alleged medical misconduct, it just rapidly evolved. It became this huge national discussion about really fundamental stuff.
Yeah.
Fairness in healthcare, privilege in education, symbolized by that 4+4 program, suspicions about corruption.
And it was really fueled by intense public skepticism, a lot of online digging, just the sheer volume of conversation, which put the authorities in a tricky spot trying to manage it all.
Right. And the official response, as the source lays out, involved serious consequences like stripping licenses, promising reviews of programs like the 4+4, and then trying to cool down the online conversation.
We basically trace the thread from one specific messy human situation right through to this broad commentary on Chinese society, watching the public focus shift from the individuals to the systems, especially those perceived back doors.
And even within that really heavy discussion, the source reminded us about the public's ability to use humor, that sharp, dark humor, as both a release and a critique of that perceived unfairness.
It's just a striking example, isn't it? How one event, blown up online, can become this huge focal point for all these pent-up frustrations about fairness and access.
Absolutely, which kind of leaves you with a final thought to chew on, maybe. When you see these events blow up online, debated so intensely, how much does it actually change those deeper systemic issues? Like fairness, like privilege?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, even after the storm calms down, officials act, the online heat decreases. Does that intense public scrutiny actually lead to lasting shifts? Or does the conversation just sort of move on, waiting for the next spark? Something to definitely think about.